All right, let's break down what makes Scoot Henderson a top draft prospect, including the one trait that the Pelicans really feel put him ahead of Zion Williamson. Let's break it down in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans, and NBA as a whole, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with y'all on this Wednesday, and we've got a Scoot Henderson draft profile. The prospect the Pelicans reportedly are looking to trade up for and might include Zion Williamson or Brandon Ingram in a deal. So what makes this guy so good that they need to do that? We'll look at his strengths, his weaknesses in the third segment, and in the second segment, there's one quality in particular that it seems like they feel is better than Zion Williamson and is maybe also a shot at Zion Williamson. And I've got a quote for you on this one. That's coming up in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, breaking this team down, all the latest news. We've been talking about Scoot Henderson for a couple of weeks now here on the show with good reason. And giving you draft coverage you don't get anywhere else. No hot takes or anything like that. Just Pelicans talk Monday through Friday. Become an everydayer, because if you are, then yesterday's news from Shams shouldn't have surprised you at all, even if it made you upset. You can do this by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. And if you want to support the channel, no need to give me money or anything like that. Just comment down below on YouTube. So Scoot Henderson draft profile. This is the guy the Pelicans want. When you hear them talking about trading up into the second or third spot in the draft, they're not trying to trade for 2 or 3. They're trying to trade for Scoot Henderson. Point guard from the G League Ignite, 19 years old, 6'2" height, 195 pounds, and a 6'9" wingspan. What's most interesting about Scoot Henderson is, one, he's a little undersized. We'll get into that in the third segment when we look at some of the weaknesses with him. But that wingspan's good at 6'9". He has played for the G League Ignite for 2 years. So this is a guy who, though he's 19 years old, already has 2 years of pro experience. And last season, when given the full reins to run that G League Ignite team, 16.5 points per game, 6.5 assists. Those are very good numbers, and we've seen that the G League Ignite players tend to come into the NBA fairly ready, if even still a little bit raw. And don't forget, last year's first-round pick, Dyson Daniels, played for them as well. But if you want an NBA comp for Scoot Henderson, there's 2 names that come to mind, especially when you watch him play. And that's Russell Westbrook and Derrick Rose. And that's because this dude is an exceptional athlete who throws down ferocious dunks, wants to cut into the lane, drive to the rim, and either throw it down or lay it in with a real nice touch around the basket. The level of athleticism that this guy has and his ability to get to the rim like he does is simply going to keep him in the league even if nothing else comes from this. Being that explosive of an athlete who can get to the rim at that high of a level and finish well above the rim with that size and quickness, with that wingspan, with that strength, and who's a creative finisher, he'll last in the league, even if he never develops a three-point shot. More to come on that. The dude is just that good. It's a freak athlete with an insane first step and crazy strength. And as he gets better and better, he's going to be able to score at the rim with no issues at all. And that's why you see his NBA comp being Russell Westbrook and Derrick Rose, both guys who have done that. You know, Westbrook's a Hall of Famer. Rose maybe not, but won an MVP award, the youngest MVP award winner in NBA history. But beyond that, he's a gifted passer. This is a guy who, when he drives and attacks, can find the open man and spray the ball out from below the basket. The New Orleans Pelicans don't really have a drive and kick kind of guy, and that is something that Scoot Henderson absolutely can do, whether it's a big man down low in the dunker spot or shooters on the wing. But his handle is very good. And you see him hold and hesitate with his dribble to create space. There's a lot of patience in his offensive game. So as he starts to drive, he doesn't mind holding up for a second, hitting the brakes, stopping on a dime, and waiting for an opening in the defense. And then he can either attack that opening himself or make passes that take advantage of those defensive mistakes and rotations. He's a smart NBA player. So when the Pelicans look at this guy and think he's got all NBA potential and could lead a team, they're not wrong. It jumps out at you. I don't have his G League numbers from the first year in front of me, and I can't find them for whatever reason. But from what I remember seeing is he averaged something like 3.5, 4 assists per game. And then second year, when he was allowed much more room to operate and do things, he got it closer to 7. That's a good improvement. He can run a team. If you're looking for more of a floor general, it's this guy. And because of that speed, that athleticism, that strength, he can get out in transition and run and make the right read. And if you're trying to kind of build an identity with the Pelicans, you have Scoot Henderson pushing you on the break. You've got one. Same if you have Zion Williamson there and Trey Murphy or B.I. there instead of Zion. All of those guys can play in transition, and New Orleans can freaking crush you if you add Scoot Henderson into that mix. But because of that hesitation game, the patience to his game, he can play in the half court too. And at times when you just need a dude to go and get a bucket, he's going to be able to at least get to the rim, get fouled, finish, or dunk it. Really as simple as that. He also has a mid-range game too. You know, it reminds you a little bit of Chris Paul, driving into the teeth of the defense, getting to the free throw line, nothing's there. Let me pull up and I'll shoot it. And he does that. And he hits them at a good rate. So as a pull-up shooter with that touch, you like that sort of thing. He can give you that. 42.4% of his pull-up twos, which is not a bad number at all. He also can make out of pick and roll situations. And because he can drive aggressively, teams need to sag off him, creating a little bit more room. They need to pay attention to him, or they're going to play up on him to try and take away that drive, which is going to open up the roll man in a pick and roll situation. And with the shiftiness that he has in that handle, he's going to be tough to guard in the NBA, especially. It's not much of a three-point shooter in 2 G League seasons, hasn't gone above 30%, but we'll get into that in the next segment. Basically, everyone thinks this guy is just one of those special players. He's above average defensively, has good instincts on that side of the ball, though there's room to improve there. He can force steals. He's pesky like that, if a little undisciplined at times. But this is a dude who hustles and fights every time he's out there. Great feel for the game. And he's going to put up some highlights in the NBA, as he did with the G League Ignite last season. There's a reason why no one is saying there's another point guard that comes close to him in this draft. And if it wasn't for Victor Wembanyama being Victor Wembanyama, Scoot Henderson would be the number 1 overall prospect in this draft. Easy. Easy with the type of athleticism that he has and the strength that he has, an NBA-ready body. This is the type of guy you absolutely want to have on your team, and maybe the Pelicans are willing to trade a big name player for. But there's another quality, and this, of all of the things that Shams Charania has said, is the most interesting, the most telling, the most revealing, and is also a shot at Zion Williamson. I'll let you know what that is coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Before we get to that, though, today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy, and it's a lot of fun, and it's super easy to do. Prize Picks, you just pick 2 to 6 players, and if they go score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win 25 times your money on any single entry. And you're not playing against me. You're not playing against professional gamblers or anything like that. It's just you versus the numbers you see. Basketball might be over, but Prize Picks offers projections on any sport that you watch, including MLB, which is going strong right now. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. Use that sports knowledge that you have. Put it to your advantage, and they offer safe and fast withdrawals. So download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. You deposit $100, PrizePicks is going to give you $100. Deposit $50, they're going to give you $50. Don't forget, enter promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. Become an everydayer. Support the show. You do that, you're going to know what's going on with the team, because the Scoot Henderson news should not have been a surprise to you whatsoever, because we've been talking about it, because we know a couple of things here. Talk to people around the team and around the league, I promise you. So subscribe. Make sure you're listening Monday through Friday. Get a friend to do it as well. No superfluous stuff here. I'm going to give you measured takes on everything and look at both sides of every angle when it comes to the Pelicans. And if you want to support the channel a little bit more, comment down below on YouTube. That is a big way to support, and it's completely free. It takes 30 seconds. Even if you just want to say hi, there's a couple people in the comments. I see y'all every day just saying hi. I love that. Let's be friendly here. It's awesome. So I want to put this up front. If the Pelicans say trade Zion Williamson, let's look at him in this one. If they trade Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram for Scoot Henderson, this team is going to be worse today than they were they're going to be worse that day than they were the day before. This is a slight step back. I still think you can be competitive with Scoot Henderson on your team next year, but it's still a slight step back. And look, Scoot Henderson is an unknown, whereas Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram are not when healthy. This is a bird in hand type of situation. You know what Brandon Ingram is. You know what Zion Williamson is. The big issue with them is availability and maybe some maturity issues. Scoot Henderson might not have those maturity issues, and we'll get to that here, but you don't know if he'll actually pan out as a player. The NBA, I don't like when people say the NBA draft is a crapshoot. It's not, but there's a high degree of risk with it, and we've seen people that we thought were going to be rock-solid NBA players not end up being rock-solid NBA players. So there's an inherent risk with this sort of thing. There's also an inherent risk if you keep Zion Williamson on the team and he just keeps getting injured or doesn't take things seriously. So there's a risk with everything. And so you've just got to kind of look at what's the least riskiest opportunity and go down that road. But when you look at Scoot Henderson as a prospect coming into the draft, compare him to Zion Williamson coming in, it's not anywhere close. Scoot Henderson is not a better draft prospect than Zion Williamson was as a draft prospect. Zion Williamson was the best draft prospect coming in since Anthony Davis. Anthony Davis was the best draft prospect coming in since LeBron James. In terms of pure prospects, if Zion Williamson was coming into this draft too, you would have him above Scoot Henderson. I don't know where you would put Scoot Henderson in relation to Ja Morant, but maybe close. But you would have Zion Williamson above anybody. Simple as that. But there's one area that somebody is telegraphing that they think Scoot Henderson beats Zion Williamson out in. Here's a line, a quote, I transcribed it from Shams Charania in his report for FanDuel TV on Wednesday when he came out with this. He says, quote, I think more than anything, they, the Pelicans, look at him as a franchise-type guard, a guy that can be a culture program builder for your team. He brings that toughness, that grit, that energy. He really sets the tone, end quote. Oh, man. You see that in that quote, right? I think more than anything, they look at him as a franchise-type guard, a guy that can be a culture program builder for your team. He brings that toughness, the grit, that energy. He really sets the tone. Y'all, we heard Pelicans players taking shots at both Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram this year, and they will deny that they did that, but this team has very intelligent people and players on it. They don't say anything that's not calculated or just shooting from the hip wildly like that. Things are said with a purpose and with a meaning. And if that quote, which if the Pelicans view Scoot that way, is you can assume a Pelican source, we know the Pelicans talk, well, they view something about him as like consummate professional guy that's going to hustle every single night, that's going to fight for you, and that will be the heart and soul of your team. And what they're saying by that is they don't view Zion Williamson as that, and maybe don't view Brandon Ingram as that. Grit was the word they used. Toughness is the word they used. Does either of those words necessarily describe... those don't describe Zion Williamson, right? It's debatable if they describe Brandon Ingram, and that can be okay. Not everybody is that person. You could still be an amazing basketball player without that. You hear this, right? So if maybe they're not interested in trading up and drafting Scoot Henderson. Say they're not. Let's play devil's advocate here. Maybe all of this is just simply a message to Zion Williamson of get your stuff together. Become that professional player we need you to be, and become the professional we need you to be. And maybe this is just straight up sent to be a wake-up message to Zion and his camp. We don't care what he does in his personal time. Go do, date, see whoever you want. But when it spills out into this nasty stuff in the public, man, get your house in order. You're hurt. You're not taking your rehab seriously. Take it seriously, because you need to show toughness, grit, energy, and set the tone for one another, because you're the best player on the team. Now, when you listen to Scoot Henderson talk, he says all the right things. Says all of the right things. And you feel that he wouldn't come in with any or as many of the distractions and drama and just stuff around Zion Williamson has. He's not as talented of a player as Zion. He's not as talented of a player as Zion. But I think the Pelicans are just like, man, it's always something with this guy and, to a lesser extent, Brandon Ingram. So maybe you just want someone who doesn't have that. And if you view that as Scoot Henderson, that's an attractive quality. That's an attractive quality to look for in a prospect. But that comment from Shams is really telling, isn't it? I don't know if that's actually what Scoot Henderson is all about and how he's like. It looks like it, but I'm not there in the pre-draft process talking to him, doing all of those things. But if that's the case and they're looking for that guy and they don't feel they have a culture, and I talked about this like second day or something after the season ended, that what's the Pelicans culture and how can you build one? I've talked a lot about the Miami Heat culture too. Become an everydayer and you don't miss those shows. They want someone like that. They want to build something like that. And if they feel Scoot Henderson's that guy, maybe it does elevate him above Zion Williamson or Brandon Ingram, even if he's not as talented as either of those guys. Maybe you just need the dude who has that dog in him, right? And when that dude's playing hard, everyone else has to play hard because, well, he's doing it, so you better too, otherwise you look bad. That is a skill. That is a quality that you can't really teach. And if Scoot Henderson has that, it's no surprise that the Pelicans are like, we need that. We desperately, desperately, desperately need that. And they're going to maybe try and go for it. It's like when you fire a head coach and you can tend to hire a coach that's like the exact opposite, right? So you have the star player, he's missing some qualities, so you're going to trade him for another star player, a guy that you think could be a star player that has those qualities. Even if he's lacking in other ones, like size, or at least height, three-point shooting. Those are problems. Why don't we look at those coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans of where Scoot Henderson needs to improve. But let me know what you think. That comment from Shams saying something to you? You think I'm reading a little bit too much between the lines? I don't. But I'm curious what you think. Let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. So coming up next, where's Scoot Henderson need to improve? Where is weaknesses with his game? And what could be a problem for the New Orleans Pelicans with him going forward? That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today, every day. We're here Monday through Friday. I do the show. I give you what you need to know. Under 30 minutes, make it part of your daily routine. Listen in the morning, listen in the evening. The show is going to be here for you. No days off, even in the off season. People aren't doing shows, haven't done shows in a while, don't do shows every day, don't stick to a schedule. And I'm here Monday through Friday completely free. Every day is tomorrow. We can get back to some draft coverage. I'm still trying to plan out the community mock draft in between all of this stuff constantly happening. We'll have more on trading these guys, Scoot Henderson, and other prospects in the draft, including looking at trading down for the New Orleans Pelicans. They tend to do that. Is that something they might do in this upcoming draft? So a whole lot more to come over the next couple of days and into free agency as well. There is a player, Fred VanVleet, I want to look at because he's going to be a free agent all of a sudden. So make sure you listen every day to the Locked On Pelicans, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So Scoot Henderson, draft profile on him. We went over the good. My show notes, I always have the open I do written out, and then there's segment 1, segment 2, segment 3. And sometimes these are really long notes. Sometimes they're short. Today's segment 1 just goes, this guy is good. That's all. That's literally the note to myself. Segment 3 just says weaknesses. There's not that many. I didn't need to write a ton down, to be perfectly honest with y'all. Like, he's a pretty complete elite prospect. And I think this is one of the best lead guards that we've seen come into the NBA in quite a while. The tape looks just disgusting. It's going to be a human highlight reel. When you're looking at where he needs to improve, though, or his weakness, one of the weaknesses which you can't improve is height. He's 6'2". It's short. It's small. And we've seen at times that archetype doesn't do particularly well in the NBA. Look at Portland with Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, two smaller guards, and how rough they were defensively for years, something that held them back despite their offensive prowess. Do you want to replicate that here in New Orleans? Not ideal, especially with Jose Alvarado, right? Who's like barely 6 feet, if he is. Like I don't know. That jersey's small looking, right? That's a game-worn one. So can you afford something like that, or is the backcourt going to be a defensive liability? I don't know if we need to read too much or overthink his height. Yeah, it means he's going to be targeted at times defensively, but his wingspan's 6'9". That's a +7. That grades out really, really well. And he's also very, very strong and has an NBA-ready body that I don't think he's going to be a defensive liability just in terms of size. The athleticism is there to keep up with people. He does have a bit of a nose for the ball, too. Defensively, where he's going to struggle is he's undisciplined at times and definitely commits too many fouls. And that's an area you would like to see him improve upon. I think that's one of those things that honestly just like comes with time and playing and experience in the NBA. So I think with time, he'll be fine. But with a 6'7" wingspan, like, you're okay. That's not a small guard. That's not like a short guard with also short T-Rex arms or something like that. He's fine. And with the strength that he has, he won't be a defensive liability. The biggest issue with him is the three-point shooting. That is not great. 27.5% last season. That's up from like 19% the year before. Those aren't good. Those aren't good numbers that you can't eclipse 30% shooting from three. That is something that should really, really scare you and wonder about spacing with a guy like Zion Williamson out there on the court. If you have a starting center too, can you really, really have him out there and have, basically Zion and two other non-shooters? It's not great. We've seen spacing be an issue. I think part of that's mitigated by the fact that this dude can get to the rim, and it's not like, well, he's, a defensive specialist or a passing specialist or anything like that. Like, he can do other things and he can still score, and that can space the court for Zion Williamson too when you can get downhill to the degree that he does. I think that is an impressive thing. You'd still like him to have a three-point shot, and that is not something he has now. Looking at that mid-range jumper that he has, you can see it. You can see that it could happen. I'm not going to say he will be a good three-point shooter, but you can see at least the potential. His mechanics change from year 1 in the G League to year 2 in the G League. That's a good thing. And it seems like he could expand the range further out. Part of the problem is he doesn't play a particularly efficient at times style of basketball. He does have poor shot selection, taking a lot of long twos that he doesn't hit at a particularly high rate. But if you expand that out to the three-point line and he hits them at the same rate, all of a sudden that number becomes good because that shot's worth one more point. So if you can coach that into him, out of him, however you want to look at it, I think there's a lot more potential there for him to become an elite level type of player, and does at least have the potential to grow his game there. But other than that, this dude's solid, can get to the rim, can play point guard, doesn't turn the ball over at a high rate either, has a lot of craftiness to his game, explosive athlete. And then all the stuff about leadership, grit, energy, effort, all of those things you feel this team just kind of needs. And it's probably part of the reason why the Pelicans are like, maybe we try and trade up and get Scoot Henderson and move off from one of our 2 star players. They like this guy. This is why. You think Scoot Henderson is that good? Do you think they should stay away from Scoot Henderson? Let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you want general NBA coverage, go check out the Locked On NBA Podcast. I'm there on Wednesday. You think the Nuggets were a weak NBA champion, paper champion? I talk about it on the show. And of course, if you want more draft coverage, look at Locked On NBA Big Board, the best draft coverage around. If you want to know more on Scoot Henderson, number 3 on Rafael Barlow's Big Board, by the way, not number 2. Just saying. All right, that's going to do it. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, and I'll be back with you all tomorrow.